This video will cover using the feature of automatically creating break entries in daily payroll. Before we get into using the new feature, we're going to look at a little bit of background information and also the setup required to use the utility. First, to understand how rest and recovery is calculated, you can go to two sources on the internet depending on your state. In California, you can go to the Department of Industrial Relations, dir.ca.gov, and search for AB 1513 FAQs. On this website, you'll understand how the rest and recovery is calculated, what's included and not included in the rest break average hourly rate, and also see examples of how the calculations are made. If you would understand this best in Spanish, or if you need to send this to any of your customers or clients in Spanish, you can also go to the En Español link to see all the same information in Spanish. If you're in Washington, you can go to the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries, lni.wa.gov, and then look for paid agricultural rest breaks. You can go to the link to get to the PDF for all of the policies regarding rest breaks. Now let's look at some of the setup in the program. The first thing that we're going to look at is the wage types. This is what tells the program what type of pay we're entering. So the setup for the wage types is under the payroll menu, setup, and then wage types. We'll use a 2-digit code to identify the wage type. Our rest and recovery or rest time is an hourly entry, so we're going to leave the base pay type regular hours. And then we can put in our description. So you may call it rest time, or in California we use the term rest and recovery. You can use an alternate description for the line items on the check if you'd like by typing in a description for the check stub description. And then in the summary, you can have an alternate description. Both states require you to print the total break time paid for the week and the total gross wages for that. So our checks do a summary that totals up the weekly rest and recovery pay. If you have any employees elect to do a Spanish stub, then you can enter in an alternate Spanish description. All of the other default settings will remain the same. Our check calculations and tax calculations will all be defaulted to be taxable, so we just go ahead and save that entry. Now that code that's entered in for the rest time needs two other setup items done to complete our setup. The first, we're going to go to the Tools menu, Program Setup, and then we're in our Payroll module, so we're going to go to our Payroll tab, and then this is on the Minimum Wage Overtime tab. Down on the lower right hand corner, we have default wage types that the program uses for making different types of calculations. So that wage type we just set up for our breaks will be entered in under the breaks field. And then we just go ahead and hit OK to save that. Our next item is going to be back on our payroll menu. We're going to go to Payroll again and Setup, and then rest and recovery time. If you've used our program for Safe Harbor, the restitution payments in California, or if you've used our rest and recovery report, you may already have an entry set up in this rest and recovery non-productive time table. But with the new feature, we're going to be adding in a wage code, and if you'd like, a job, cost or crop ID, or GL number that will be used when the program creates the break lines for you. So I'll go ahead and enter in my same wage code for my rest time, and then I may want to have a different job created on those lines. So I can insert in here my job code for break time. Now, if you want the program to retain the crop or cost ID from your entries and use that on the break time, we can just go ahead and leave that blank and the GL as well. But if you want to use an alternate code there, you may enter that in. Our type is going to be rest and recovery. And then for labor contractors, on some of the invoice formats, we combine the rest time into one entry, so that combined billing may be check marked. And then the default button will be check marked for the line that you want the program to use when you have the rest created. So again, you may have other lines in this table, but the one marked default is what the program will use when it creates the break lines. So now we're going to look at one more area of setup, but we can actually go ahead and go into our daily payroll entry now and complete the setup there. So we go in our payroll, daily payroll entry, and then daily payroll entry. Now there'll be a new option on the right-click menu called breaks. And before we are able to apply the breaks, there's one more setup we need to do, the setup break time amounts. This tells the program how many breaks need to be created. So depending on your state and your company policies, the amount of breaks that you may want to pay may vary. Or you may give a higher allowance for breaks than required by law. I've just pulled up on my screen here in our video the Farm Employers Labor Service newsletter from October 2017, and they included a neat little table here to tell you how many rest periods and meal periods are required by law. So if the employees are going to be working less than 3.5 hours, they're not required to have a rest period. But if they work over 3.5 hours, they are to receive 1. Once they work over 6 hours, they would receive 2. Over 10, 3, and 14, 4. And then we again have the meal periods, but we're mainly concerned with our rest periods now. So what we'll do, our first line, we'll go ahead, if we're doing daily payroll, we'll use that 3.5 and say after they work 3.5, we want to pay 1 break. Now that 1 break, if you're doing 10 minutes, we take 10 minutes divided by 60 to calculate the units that are entered in on the payroll. So you can elect how you want to round this, if you want to round it to 2 digits and do 0.17, or if you want to go out further and do 1.67 or 1.667, you have up to 4 digits there that you can use. Now when you have 2 breaks, that's 20 minutes, so our units are 0.33 or 1/3 of an hour. So if they only work 6 hours, you don't have to do the 2 breaks. It's only when they go over. So you may want to put in there 6.05. Or again, if your company's policies allow them to take 2 breaks at 6 hours, you can go ahead and enter that in and leave it 6 to apply 2 breaks. Then we can put in our 10 hours, and then or actually that would be 10.05 because it's over 10 hours, and now they are to receive 3 breaks. So that would be a half an hour. Our 3 breaks would be 30 minutes. Now we typically recommend to just do the break time as a regular break time, because the program, if you're using the overtime premium, will automatically add the extra compensation for their overtime. But we do have some customers that use overtime break and just pay that out at time and a half, so that is an option there if you want to use that method. So then more than 14 hours, then they would get 4 breaks. Hopefully they're not working 14-hour days, but that can apply. So that'd be 40 minutes divided by 60. So we would be paying out 0.66 or 0.667, or we can just round up to 0.67. Now we do have some customers that do totals for the entire week or totals by grower. So if you're using weekly totals, you would need to adjust the hours worked to reflect how many days they work that week, and that may be something that you have to adjust each time you start a timesheet to make sure that it's going to calculate the correct breaks. So now what we're going to do is review a few examples, and I'm going to use our timesheet method to bring up some specific examples. However, you don't have to use timesheets or apply breaks by timesheet. Actually, in some cases, our recommended method is going to be waiting until all of the payroll is done for the crew or for the week, and creating the breaks at one time at the end of all of the entries. But there may be some circumstances where you do want to do it by timesheet. So we'll discuss a few of those items as we go along. So the first sheet I'm going to bring up is an example of base hourly and incentive pay. So I have 4 employees here I've entered in. Their base hours, they're getting paid at $10.50, so they're getting paid at minimum wage. And then they are receiving an incentive pay, possibly per pound or per bucket or bin, as an additional incentive. So once I've completed my hours and my entries, I'm going to go ahead and right click and go to the breaks option, and then I'm going to select my option now, add update break lines. It's going to bring up a pop-up to ask if we're going to do just the currently displayed entries or all entries for the pay period. So for our examples, for purposes of this video, I'm going to use the displayed entries. But if you are ready to create all entries for your pay period, you can select the starting and ending dates. Now, in this example, we have the default check mark at the bottom, extract break time from hourly wages. This will default for California because when we have any hourly and incentive pay, we are basing that calculation on the average rate, combining those two, their regular rate of pay. In Washington, there's a little confusion because they use the term regular rate of pay, but in some of their examples and policies, they mention if the employees are covered and paid for their hours at minimum wage, the breaks don't have to be separated out because they're already getting paid on the employer's time. So in that case, this box will be unchecked. The option extract break time from employees that only have hourly wages, we'll discuss that in a few moments, where if there's only hourly and no incentive or piecework, you have a choice as to whether or not the breaks will be pulled out. So I'll go ahead and hit OK here, and now it will create, you can see it's created our lines, and each of these employees has their average hourly rate updated on the rest lines. And you can see the job code on those is our job for breaks, BT. Now we do get a reminder, since we have done this just on the displayed entries, that these are estimated pay rates because this is the average just for the entries that were displayed. So if you do use the method of applying or creating the breaks based on the timesheet, you will need to use the rest and recovery report, or use the option to calculate rest and recovery on the daily payroll check report to make final calculations for the pay rates for the week. So we go ahead and hit OK here. Now if there's any adjustments, if we had any issues maybe with our pieces and we came in and made corrections to either the piece or the rates, then we can right click and take the option to add update, and that will recalculate our average hourly rates. But again, if you're doing that on a timesheet or a daily basis, those calculations will be adjusted again at the end of the week. So let's look at another example. And this is where we have 2 different piece rates in the day. So I'm going to go ahead and change my timesheet to some entries I already have set up with piecework. And they're getting paid by the bin, and they did some oranges, 2 hours on oranges, and then they did some lemons, and they had 3 hours on the lemons. So again, I can go ahead and take my right click and do breaks and add update break lines. And I'm going to again do just my displayed entries here. And then because the lemons had a higher amount of hours, the breaks were pulled out of the lemons. And so you can see it's retained there, and that's the cost ID that has been used. But there may be a case, I'm going to go ahead and delete those lines and update these to 3 hours and make the hours the same on both lemons and oranges. When I do my breaks at this point, the hours are the same, so the program will just select one of those when it creates the breaks. So in this case, again, it selected the lemons. That was probably the last entries that were entered in. So that's what it's adjusted our piecework hours on and created our breaks. So this is a case where you may want to use the timesheet method. If we want the breaks created under the oranges, we can enter those oranges under a separate timesheet number and apply the breaks. So that would be the cost ID, or in a labor contractor situation, the crop ID that would be used for the breaks. So now we'll go and look at another example of our hourly. So I'm going to go to my next timesheet where we have just hourly entries, this one employee. We'll go ahead again and take our breaks option on the right click menu and go to the add update. Now, if I say that I want to extract break time from employees that have hourly wages, then it will extract the breaks. But if I leave that unchecked and just hit OK here, nothing has been adjusted. And we have some customers that in that situation, if employee is only hourly, they don't create any breaks. But we have some customers that have decided they want to be consistent and always itemize breaks, just so the employees are used to seeing those on their checks. So if we do want to go ahead and separate out the breaks for this employee, then I can go ahead and go back to my add update break line items and then go ahead and check mark that we want break times extracted for employees that only have hourly wages. And then now we'll have our break lines created, separating out, pulling out the regular hours and adding our rest time entries. And you can see here they worked on different cost centers or crops each day. And so since we're doing a separate daily, they only worked on one crop each day, it's pulled in that crop ID. Now, a related example I mentioned, we have a little bit of a difference in Washington. So if you don't have to pay out breaks because you have paid their hours in full, or if you're adding on any bonuses that are not factored into a break calculation, if it's not a production-based bonus and you don't want the piecework factored into that, then when you do the add update breaks, you would uncheck the option to extract break time from hourly wages, and then that will make no adjustment to the time. Oops, hit down a little bit there. So no lines have been created. So once we finish all of our entries, again, if we go back and we clear out the timesheet, we can see all of our entries here on the screen. If we want to apply the breaks to everything in the daily payroll, we can clear out the timesheet, clear out the viewing name, clear out the crew ID, and then you can do your add update break lines. Now we have some cases with customers where they may be entering in time into daily payroll on a live basis. So it may be Tuesday and we have entries in daily payroll for the prior week and also starting Monday's entries. So if you're doing the add breaks for all entries in the pay period, then you will go ahead and select the starting and ending date that the breaks will be generated for. So if we have something already entered in for the 30th or the 31st, it won't create those breaks yet. It'll just use the pay period that you're currently preparing the payroll for. And then we can go ahead and again, you can use this at the end of the payroll to create your breaks instead of a timesheet basis. Then now you can see the employees' breaks are all at the same rate because it's factoring in that entire pay period. If you use the timesheet method, again just for review, when you are done with your payroll, you can either go to the breaks menu and use the rest and recovery pay rate report, to recalculate the break time, or you can use the batch report. The batch report gives you the option of calculating the break times while you're creating the checks and eliminates the step of having to run the rest and recovery report. So when we go to the print batch report, we can do the same date options for our pay period, and in our check calculations we can say calculate our minimum wage, our rest and recovery, and if you're doing overtime you can do overtime at the same time, and then you can review that and then take the option to create checks when you're ready. We hope this video helps you use this new feature to automatically create break lines. If you have any questions, please feel free to email the support department at support@datatechag.com. Thank you.